Um, Good afternoon. Thank you for sticking around to listen to what I have to share today. My name is Jason Cervenec, and I'm actually here to represent a team that's been doing work in central Ohio and around the state of Ohio. I started at the center 2 years ago, and I guess this project wasn't something I expected would really be in the purview of my outreach work there. And it's something my predecessor started, but it's ended up being one of the most innovative programs we're doing because of the ongoing change in the partnership. And I'm actually also representing a colleague who's in our School of Environment and Natural Resources, a faith-based group that's out of Columbus, but also works throughout the state, and a small business that's also located in central Ohio. So these are all the partners on the project. The Byrd Polar Research Center is actually the oldest interdisciplinary center in Ohio State. We're changing our name. We've actually changed our name a few months ago to capture work we started 20 years ago, which is really taking our work out of the poles to also involve climate. Our School of Environment and Natural Resources, my colleague, was actually hired to do work on the environment and religion, and understanding the rich history that goes there and establishing things like wilderness areas. His work is also soon extending into extension work to faith-based communities. And then Ohio Interfaith Power and Light, they're a faith-based group that's an affiliate of a national organization that works to have a religious response to climate change. And one of the steps that they've taken in Ohio is active work to try to reduce emissions in houses of worship, which you'll see is actually one of the biggest sectors that there's been very little done to address efficiency, and some of the architecture there is actually the most inefficient in the country. So that's kind of the groups. The history began in 2009 when my predecessor, Carol Landis, wrote an Ohio EPA grant to try to do a clergy caucus to educate members of the religious community on climate change. And she started to realize from Greg Hitzhusen and School of Environment and Natural Resources that many faith-based groups had statements on climate change that were quite old, but there'd been very little work done to actually educate on clergy to the science behind those and why those documents had been written. And I think we're all familiar with the host of different scientific publications that describe the science of climate change, different steps that can be done, actions that can be taken. But I think it's more surprising, and it wasn't until Greg pointed this out, the number of faith-based groups around the world that have actually taken, many years ago in most cases, pretty aggressive stance on climate change. And in fact, there'll be another large document coming out this spring, which is the Pope will actually be publishing an encyclical. So that'll only add to all the documents that are here on what different faith communities should be doing to address climate change. And a lot of these really come from the moral imperative. A lot of the faith-based groups address it from that standpoint, that the people that are least able to prepare for climate change are the ones that will be most impacted, and in a lot of cases are the ones that didn't cause the challenges we face. Now, when I was hired at the Byrd Center, I expected to be doing a lot of work with schools, museums, zoos. And as you do that, we always have a long discussion with schools or not a long discussion, but discussion of what exactly a teacher wants to get when we work with their school, either if it's a funded project or just a school visit. And we know there's a lot of students out there. I think one of the surprising things is that according to Pew in 2007, 83.1% of Americans said that they're a member of some faith community. This actually makes faith-based organizations the largest voluntary membership style of organization in the country. So if outreach work isn't addressing them, if I'm working with schools, which is a natural group to work with, there's actually a lot more individuals that outreach work can be done with in faith-based groups. The difference is that they arrive at your doorstep with different needs, and we even found for vastly different reasons. The partners on this program, these projects, there's three different sectors, I guess. There's Ohio State, there's my center, and also our School of Environmental and Natural Resources, and that's kind of the red on the screen, programs that we did. Ohio Interfaith Power and Light was actually started in 2008. They were doing a number of initiatives on their own that was more moral-based but not really scientific-based. And then we also had a law that passed in Ohio, and that required a decoupled energy production from efficiency or distribution. And that had actually had a set-aside that utilities had to reduce power consumption, and they weren't sure how to do this. They knew they could do some stuff in residential and industrial, but they knew one of the areas they had to reach out was to faith-based groups, and they weren't sure how to do that. So a lot of our project work stemmed from where you see the overlap in the Venn diagram. Some places where all three organizations came together to get initiatives enacted, and then a few other places where two of them came together. We've had over 200 and some people come through our center over the last year with tours from faith-based organizations. Some interesting experiences you have. It's very difficult to demonize individuals that are doing scientific work if you stood across the hall from them on an hour-and-a-half tour of a facility. I think one of the most telling quotes we had was a leader of a congregation that came through the center, and after he left, as he was leaving, he told one of our graduate students, I really didn't accept climate change was happening. I've really not taken I've not been somebody who's advocating any action on this. I thought this was a radical idea, and after touring your center, you presented a lot of evidence, and you don't seem like you're very radical. And so that was one of those quotes we kind of found in our back pocket, that interacting with somebody on a personal level was very powerful. Ohio Interfaith Power and Light 3 years ago started a teaching on climate change. This is kind of harkening back to the civil rights era. We've started doing this as an annual event, and one of the things we do that is we actually broadcast it statewide. So we do remote centers all across the state. We have our climate scientists discuss some aspect of climate change. We've become more and more local as time's gone on, and then we also have local discussion that happens there. One of the things you'll find with this is a lot of folks think that having a scientist and somebody from a religious community in the same room is very antithetical, that they don't really work together. What you find out is everybody has a niche that they play, and in the faith-based community they want to understand the climate science, and they want to understand why this matters and who's going to be impacted by it. An Earthkeeping Summit we hosted last year, Catherine Hayhoe came and spoke as part of that, had a large attendance at that event. And a State of the Climate event, which is the slide I actually opened up with, we did an event downtown last year that actually featured our climate scientists at our Statehouse in the atrium presenting to legislators and also faith leaders in the same room. And there's a lot of people that are legislators that will come to an event if they know faith leaders expect to see them there that wouldn't show up at a climate-based event for any other reason. And then on the left, you see some sharing of technology. We found out using technology to video events, broadcast events, tape events, and have them available for people later on is very important. And then the action step, getting houses of worship to actually reduce their energy consumption. Oops, keyboard. So three programs I want to focus on. The one that maybe we started out with was the climate conversations, the teaching event. This has been going on for 4 years now. We broadcast to 4 different sites around the state. There's conversation that happens there. Ohio Interfaith Power and Light's actually put a website up now that shares some of the different action steps that are to be taken by houses of worship. So when we found out there's a lot of barriers there, because even if your house of worship wanted to take action, you didn't understand what to do. And there was a lot of spinning of wheels. And maybe the biggest challenge with our partnership's been, as we roll out these educational pieces and action steps, it's taking 12 and 9 months to take action by the time you train folks, figure out the bureaucracy, research the program, figure out if it fits in your budget, even if it's a very short repayment period, and go ahead and do some remediation step. And then student interns, and this is something we added this year. A lot of these houses of worship didn't have the technical know-how and the staffing to do it. And we found out that our College of Agriculture has a new sustainability environment economics program, and those students had to do an internship. So this was a marriage made in heaven. Students had to do an internship. There weren't enough sites. Houses of worship wanted to take action on something related to sustainability, most of them climate change and energy efficiency. They didn't have the technical know-how. So by putting those two together, we're hoping to try to cut this implementation period down to below a year. Now, results from this, keeping metrics is very important. Like I said, last year alone, 265 people being impacted by some scientists from our center that's going out to speak or coming through our center. We've been able to engage 4 of the major urban areas in Columbus. Rural areas have been a bit more challenging because the critical mass isn't quite there. Just in the first year alone with this internship programs, we already have 9 OSU students that are partnered with 7 houses of worship to try to take those action steps. More specific things, with the environmental efficiency requirements in Ohio, there was a grant given from the utilities to Ohio Interfaith Power and Light to try to reduce energy consumption. And they had to set target goals. And these target goals had to be accomplished by 2015 at the end of the year. So we've actually made pretty good progress, not as fast as we hoped. We found out these interns that started this fall have automatically ramped up that period to implementation. So we have 17 green teams. These are houses of worship that have rallied people around, researching a problem, taking action steps. There's a large difference amongst different organizations. Some places this team is really one person with a few people that are just showing up at meetings. But it's some person that maybe is a retired individual and he operates the building and he wants to see energy efficiency because the power bills are too expensive. We've also had level 2 audits done. These are very comprehensive audits that tell you what steps you can take to go ahead and try to save money. And then 29 energy stewards congregations. These are ones that actually use EPA Portfolio Manager to manage how much energy, monitor amount of energy use, and then reduce. Now that might not seem like a big deal. We did have one of these houses of worship that was given the 2013 US EPA award. There's actually a category for houses of worship. They didn't go into this expecting to apply for the award. They actually went into it because they had to replace a boiler and they knew that they needed to save money. And they had a lot of other programs they wanted to put that money to. This came right before the polar vortex hit Ohio last year. Their repayment period was supposed to be between 3 and 4 years. As of last year, at the end of last year, they were pretty sure their repayment period was down to just over 2 years. So they automatically, after that's done, they'll be banking a lot of money that they wouldn't have otherwise had for other programs. And then we can actually show how much electricity and natural gas has been saved, and then what the amount of money saved in people's pockets. We find a lot of the groups that come on tours or come to these programs, they really show up for 2 different reasons, and listening is very important. Some show up really caring about the moral piece. They want to take action to improve somebody else's life. Others show up because they just care about the money. They really don't have a budget to pay for an old building that's very inefficient, draining power, has lots of leaks, and there's rebate programs, and they really want to address that. We found it's better not to fight that natural instinct. Whatever they come to the door with, you work with. Try to expand that level of understanding beyond it, but you at least start how they arrive at your doorstep. If you're planning or thinking about working with different houses of worship, a few things to consider, different faith communities. There isn't necessarily a deep understanding, and it's probably not best to try to go through everything. Carve off a narrative you wanted to talk about. You know, the 400-word summary of climate change is a great place to start. We've also found talking about local impacts matters a lot because people can see those, or are starting to see those now. Operational practices aren't necessarily evidence-based. A few things we came across, the organist really wants to keep that house of worship at the same temperature and humidity all week long because there's this belief that somehow the organ needs that. Actually, there's been studies done in this organ companies that you only have to have it that temperature and humidity about an hour before you actually start the service. So keeping your building at a certain temperature and humidity is not necessary. You have stained glass windows, terribly leaky, not efficient. Lighting systems, the amount of concern there is, they don't think there's good lighting that's available that's LED. So it's reducing barriers and showing that there are other options available, and these are what the student interns at Ohio State have been able to do. Individual leadership, the person paying the bill is not necessarily in a leadership position in the church. They might not actually know how much they're paying for power or natural gas. And it seems surprising, but we found out as people were monitoring stuff or adding stuff into Portfolio Manager, they had no idea of the historic use of power in the building. Just because of who was paying the bill and who was making the decisions. Denominational stands, many of them don't actually know what their own denominational stand is. I don't recommend starting out there, because that's a bit of browbeating. But it's something to bring up in conversation that Greg and SCNR is able to say. Many don't realize they have a stand on climate change and impacts. And then this can take time. And I think when we started in 2009, we didn't have a clear idea of where we'd be long term. I think this was really envisioned as a short-term project. It's morphed into something which has been able to result in action items, which has been energy efficiency and savings. And roadblocks, don't go in expecting that every faith community is going to have the same stand on things, and the feedback you're going to get from different people, even within the same organization, could be vastly different. Depends on what the leadership position is, person in leadership, and funds may not always be available even if the repayback's very brief. A few things that I always like to mention, listening is probably the most important thing on that list, and that relationships matter. They really want to have a relationship with somebody that they can trust. A few thanks to people that are in an organization at Byrd. And then I would go right to the end on this. I'm very fortunate because AGU had the climate change communication programs 2 years ago I went to. I see a few people in the room that were actually presenting at those events, which helped me. I listed a number of other things up here that if you're a science educator and somebody who's communicating this, I would recommend reading. kind of in order of importance because it helps you think about stuff like the second article there just on the language you're using. And also, local relevance is critical. Thank you.